The message arrived on a Monday morning, and it changed everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. Admiral Katie Morgan stood on the bridge of her carrier. The Relentless, watching the alien transmission play on the main screen. The creature speaking was unlike anything she had ever seen. It stood 8 feet tall, with skin that looked like cracked glass and eyes that glowed a deep purple. Its voice was cold and ancient, translated by computers into perfect English. "People of Earth," the alien said, "I am High Commander Vethros of the Velthari Dominion. For 12,000 years, we have ruled the Orion arm of this galaxy. We have conquered 400 species. We have ended civilizations older than your sun. And now we come for you." Katie watched as the alien continued its speech. It promised destruction. It promised extinction. It promised that within 1 year, no human would remain alive in the universe. The ultimatum was simple: surrender immediately, and some humans would be kept as slaves, or resist and face total annihilation. When the message ended, the bridge fell silent. Katie looked around at her crew. She expected fear. She expected panic. Instead, she saw something else entirely. Lieutenant Danny Reyes looked up from his console with a smile that seemed almost hungry. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to see what's happening on Earth." Katie walked over to his station. On the screen, she saw news feeds from around the world. People were not running. They were not hiding. They were laughing. Someone had already made T-shirts with the alien's face on them. Memes spread across social media faster than the original message had. Betting websites were taking odds on how long the war would last. Katie pinched the bridge of her nose. "Of course," she muttered. "Of course, this is how we react." But deep down, she felt something warm in her chest. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe just recognition. This was humanity. This was who they were. They had spent their entire existence fighting each other, surviving disasters, and refusing to give up. An alien invasion was just another problem to solve. In Washington, President Marcus Webb called an emergency meeting of every world leader. Within hours, old enemies sat at the same table. Russia and America. China and Japan. India and Pakistan. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth agreed on something: they would not surrender. President Webb addressed the nation that evening. He stood behind a podium, his face calm and steady. He had served as a Marine for 20 years before entering politics. He had seen war. He had lost friends. He knew what was coming. "The Velthari believe they are predators," he said. "They have spent 12,000 years hunting prey. They have grown fat and lazy on easy victories. What they do not understand is that Earth has never produced prey. We have only ever produced competitors." The speech went viral within minutes. People played it in bars and living rooms. Soldiers played it in barracks. Children played it in schools. It became a rallying cry for a species that had always loved a good underdog story. Behind closed doors, the real work began. General Patricia Cole was appointed head of the newly formed Terran Defense Initiative. She was 63 years old, had commanded troops on 4 continents, and had never lost a battle. Now she faced her greatest challenge. "Show me what we're dealing with," she said to her intelligence team. The numbers were not good. The Velthari had thousands of warships. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons could destroy cities from orbit. Their shields could withstand nuclear strikes. On paper, humanity had no chance. But Patricia had not built her career on paper. What about their tactics? She asked her aide. A young officer named Howard Grant pulled up the analysis. "That's where it gets interesting, ma'am. They haven't changed their battle strategies in over 2,000 years. They don't need to. No one has ever given them a real fight." Patricia smiled. It was not a kind smile. "So they're predictable." "Extremely, ma'am. And they've never fought a species that spent its entire history at war with itself?" "No, ma'am. Most species they encounter are peaceful. They develop technology. They reach the stars. And then the Velthari crush them. Humans are different. We developed nuclear weapons before we developed space travel. We've been killing each other since we learned to walk upright." Patricia leaned back in her chair. Outside her window, she could see the city lights of Washington. Millions of people, going about their lives, trusting her to protect them. They made a mistake, she said quietly. They picked a fight with the wrong species. Across the world, preparations began. Factories that had made cars now made weapons. Universities that had studied stars now studied alien weaknesses. Governments released every piece of information they had about the Velthari. They asked the public for help. The response was overwhelming. A 16-year-old boy from Iowa figured out how to disrupt Velthari. Shield frequencies using nothing but publicly available data and a laptop. A retired grandmother in Tokyo designed a communication jamming system that military engineers had been struggling with for weeks. A group of gamers developed tactical simulations that predicted Velthari behavior with 90% accuracy. Humanity had turned war into a group project. Admiral Katie Morgan watched all of this from her ship. She had been given command of Earth's orbital defense fleet, a collection of vessels that were smaller, weaker, and less advanced than anything the Velthari had. But her crews were eager. They trained constantly. They studied every piece of information about their enemy. "Do you think we can win?" Danny asked her one night as they watched Earth spin slowly below them. Katie thought about the question. She thought about the numbers, the odds, the cold mathematics of war. By every logical measure, they should lose. But logic had never stopped humanity before. "I think," she said slowly, "that they have no idea what they're walking into. They've conquered 400 species who all fought the same way. They've never met anything like us. They've never fought creatures who would rather die than surrender. They've never faced a species that thinks extinction is just a challenge." She turned to look at Danny. He was young, barely 25. He had his whole life ahead of him. And he was grinning like a kid about to open birthday presents. "We're going to show them something new," Katie said. "We're going to show them what happens when you corner an animal that refuses to accept defeat. And when this is over, the galaxy is going to remember our name." 6 months later, the Velthari Vanguard arrived. 300 warships, enough firepower to glass a continent. They expected to find a terrified planet begging for mercy instead. They found humanity waiting with a smile. The war had begun. The Velthari. Vanguard emerged from jump space like a swarm of angry wasps. 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying soldiers who had never known defeat. Commander Kethrick stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet grow larger on his screen. He had personally overseen the extinction of 2 species. He had burned worlds and watched civilizations crumble. This assignment was supposed to be easy. A primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel, with no experience fighting anyone but themselves. "Begin the broadcast," he ordered. His voice echoed across every channel on Earth. "Humans of Earth, this is Commander Kethrick of the Velthari Dominion. You have 1 hour to surrender your leaders and your weapons. Refuse, and we will begin the bombardment. Your cities will burn. Your children will die screaming. There will be no mercy." He waited for the panic. He waited for the surrender messages. He waited for the same fear he had seen in 400 other species. Instead, a human voice answered, "Yeah, about that." The voice belonged to Commander Lucas Perry, who sat in a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. "We have a counteroffer. How about you turn your ships around and go home? We'll even let you keep the ones that still work when this is over." Kethrick blinked his purple eyes in confusion. He had never heard a response like this. "You dare mock the Velthari Dominion?" "Mock? No. I'm completely serious. You see, we've had 6 months to prepare for you. We've studied your ships, your weapons, your tactics, and honestly, we're a little disappointed. We expected more from a species that's been doing this for 12,000 years. On Earth, millions of people watched the exchange on their screens. They watched Lucas Perry, a 45-year-old career soldier, calmly insult an alien commander who could destroy the planet. And they loved every second of it. Kethrick ended the transmission with a snarl. "Launch all fighters. Begin the attack." 300 warships surged forward. Their weapons powered up, glowing with energy that could melt steel. They moved in perfect formation, following tactics that had worked for millennia. And then the drones appeared. 10,000 of them. It's launched from hidden platforms across the Earth and its orbit. They were small, cheap, controlled by ordinary citizens sitting in their living rooms. Gamers, engineers, teenagers, who had grown up flying virtual spacecraft. Now they flew real ones. The drones carried no weapons. They didn't need to. Each one broadcast a specific frequency that the 16-year-old boy from Iowa had discovered. The frequency that made Velthury shields flicker and die. Kethrix watched in horror as the protective barriers around his ships vanished. "Impossible," he whispered. "That technology is classified. How could they possibly know?" He never got his answer. Admiral Katie Morgan's fleet emerged from behind the moon where they had been hiding for 3 days. Her ships were smaller and weaker than the Velthury vessels. But they were fast, and their crews were hungry. "All ships engage," she ordered. "Target their command vessels first. These aliens have never had to think for themselves in battle. Let's see how they handle chaos." The battle of Earth's orbit was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships darted between the larger Velthury vessels, firing at weak points that shouldn't have been known to anyone outside the Dominion. They used debris as cover. They sacrificed damaged ships to take out enemy cruisers. They fought with a creativity that Kethrix's tactical computers couldn't predict. Lieutenant Donnie Reyes flew a fighter that was held together mostly by hope and duct tape. He had been a commercial pilot before the war. Now, he was something else entirely. "I've got 3 on my tail," he reported, his voice calm despite the explosions around him. "Break left," Katie ordered. "We're sending support." "Negative, ma'am. I've got a better idea." Danny pushed his fighter directly toward the largest Velthury cruiser. The 3 ships behind him followed, their weapons firing constantly. At the last moment, Danny pulled up sharply. The pursuing ships didn't react fast enough. They slammed into their own cruiser. The resulting explosion took out 2 more vessels nearby. Danny emerged from the fireball with half his ship missing. "That's 4 for me," he said with a grin. "Anyone else keeping score?" On the ground, Sergeant Maria Santos watched the battle from a rooftop in Chicago. She was 28 years old, had joined the military to pay for college, and never expected to see actual combat. Now she commanded a defense unit of 50 soldiers and 200 civilian volunteers. Their landing troops, her radio crackled. "Sector 7. Prepare for ground combat." Maria checked her rifle. It was a standard military weapon, graded with alien-disrupting ammunition that a chemistry professor had invented in his garage. "Everyone remember your training," she told her team. "These things have never fought humans on the ground. They don't know what we're capable of." The Velthury soldiers that landed were massive, armored, and confident. They marched through the streets expecting terrified civilians to flee before them. Instead, they found ambushes on every corner. Snipers in buildings, traps in streets, children flying camera drones that reported every enemy movement, grandmothers who had learned to shoot in the weeks before the invasion, an entire species that had decided, collectively, that they would rather die fighting than live as slaves. By nightfall, the Velthury ground forces had retreated. They left behind thousands of dead soldiers and dozens of destroyed vehicles. Humanity had lost people too. Maria stood over the body of a friend she had known since basic training, and she made a silent promise. This was just the beginning. In orbit, the battle reached its climax. Kethrix's fleet had been reduced to less than 100 ships. His flagship was damaged, his communications were jammed, and his soldiers were dying in ways he had never imagined. "Retreat," he ordered. "All ships, retreat to the jump point." Admiral Katie Morgan watched the enemy flee. Her own fleet had suffered terrible losses. 63 ships destroyed, thousands of sailors dead. But they had won. Against all odds, against all logic, humanity had won. "Should we pursue?" Danny asked. Katie shook her head. "Let them go. Let them tell their empress what happened here. Let them spread the word." She opened a channel to every surviving human ship. "This is Admiral Morgan. Today we prove something the galaxy has never seen. We prove that humanity does not surrender. We do not kneel. We do not give up." Today is the first victory. It will not be the last. On Earth, people celebrated in the streets. They wept for the dead and cheered for the living. They looked up at the stars that had always seemed so distant, and for the first time, those stars felt like home. In the Velthari capital, far across the galaxy, Empress Zinthara received the report of the failed attack. She read it 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. A primitive species had defeated her vanguard. A species that had only left its home planet a century ago had destroyed 2/3 of an elite Velthari fleet. For the first time in her 300-year reign, the Empress felt something she had never experienced before: fear. She called her admirals together and gave them new orders. No more small attacks. No more underestimations. She would gather the full might of the Velthari Dominion and crush Earth personally. The humans had won a battle. She would make sure they lost the war. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. A primitive species called humanity had defeated the Velthari vanguard. For the first time in 12,000 years, someone had fought back and won. On occupied worlds across the Orion Arm, enslaved species whispered the name Earth like a prayer. On Velthari stations, soldiers who had never known fear began to look over their shoulders. And on Earth, humanity prepared for round 2. Dr. Benjamin Shaw had spent his entire career studying theoretical physics. He had written papers that maybe 100 people in the world understood. He had never expected his work to matter in any practical way. Now he stood before the United Nations Security Council, presenting the most important invention in human history. We call it the fold drive, he explained, his hands shaking slightly as he pointed at the holographic display. The Velthari use jump technology. They punch holes in space and travel through them. It's fast, but it requires established jump points, fixed locations in space. Admiral Katie Morgan leaned forward. And this is different? Completely different. Benjamin's excitement overcame his nervousness. We don't punch holes. We fold space. Imagine a piece of paper. The Velthari draw a line from one side to the other. We fold the paper so the 2 points touch. We can go anywhere, instantly, without needing a jump point. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. General Patricia Cole spoke first. You're saying we can appear anywhere in the galaxy? Anywhere we have coordinates for. Yes, we can strike Velthari supply lines. We can attack their bases. We can take the fight to them instead of waiting for them to come to us. President Marcus Webb looked at the scientists with new respect. How long until we can build these drives? We've already started. 3 months, maybe 4, and we'll have a strike fleet ready. The construction effort was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. Every nation contributed resources. Factories worked around the clock. Engineers from rival countries collaborated on designs. A species that had spent its entire history fighting itself now worked together with a unity that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Meanwhile, Empress Zinthara gathered her full war fleet, 18,000 warships, the largest military force ever assembled in the Orion Arm. She would lead the invasion personally. There would be no more mistakes, but humanity struck first. Captain Samuel Kim was 42 years old, former cargo ship pilot who had volunteered for the military on the day of the invasion. He was not the best pilot in the fleet. He was not the smartest or the bravest, but he was stubborn, creative, and completely unwilling to give up. His ship, the Defiance, was one of the first equipped with the fold drive. His crew was a collection of volunteers, former soldiers, engineers, mechanics, and one retired school teacher named Dorothy who had won a shooting competition and refused to stay home while others fought. "Everyone ready?" Samuel asked as they prepared for humanity's first offensive strike. "Ready as we'll ever be," Dorothy replied, checking her weapons console. "Let's go make some trouble." The Defiance and 12 other ships folded space and appeared at Kethro's station, the main supply depot for the Velthari war fleet. The aliens had no warning. One moment their sensors showed empty space, the next moment human ships were everywhere. "We have 6 minutes before reinforcements arrive," Samuel announced. "Focus on the supply ships. Ignore the warships unless they get in our way. The battle lasted for minutes and 37 seconds. Human ships darted through the station's defenses, destroying transport vessels loaded with food, weapons, and fuel. The Valkyrie responded slowly, her commanders unable to understand how the humans had appeared without using a jump point. By the time they organized a response, Samuel's fleet was gone. They folded space and vanished, leaving behind a crippled station and enough burning debris to supply the Valkyrie fleet for 6 months. On Earth, the footage played on every screen. People cheered as they watched alien ships explode. They turned Captain Samuel Kim into a folk hero overnight. Songs were written about the Defiance. Children played games pretending to be its crew, but the victories came at a cost. Maria Santos stood in a military cemetery outside Chicago, looking at rows of fresh graves. She had lost friends in the first battle. She had lost more in the weeks that followed, fighting Valkyrie raiders who slipped through the defensive grid. Now she stood over the grave of her brother, who had died defending a civilian shelter from orbital bombardment. Is it worth it? She asked Lucas Perry, who had come to pay his respects. Lucas considered the question carefully. He was not a man who gave easy answers. I don't know, he admitted. I know we don't have a choice. I know that if we stop fighting, we die. But whether it's worth it, that's something we'll have to decide after it's over. Maria looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, the Valkyrie fleet was gathering. 18,000 ships ready to crush Earth and everyone on it. Do you think we can win? Honestly, the numbers say no. They have too many ships, too many soldiers, too much firepower. By every logical measure, we should lose. But Lucas smiled. It was a tired smile, worn down by months of war and loss. But I've learned something about humans in this war. We don't care about the numbers. We don't accept defeat. We keep fighting until we win, or until there's no one left to fight. And that's something the Valkyrie have never faced before, across the galaxy. The full Valkyrie fleet began its journey toward Earth. Empress Zinthra stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars stream past. She had studied the reports from the first battle carefully. She had analyzed human tactics, human psychology, human history. She understood now that she was not facing ordinary prey. These creatures were something different, something dangerous. But she was not afraid. The Valkyrie had ruled for 12,000 years. They had crushed every threat, conquered every enemy, survived every challenge. Humanity was clever? Yes. Humanity was stubborn. But in the end, they were just another species to be conquered. How long until we reach Earth? She asked. 3 weeks, Empress? Zinthra nodded. In 3 weeks, she would personally oversee the destruction of humanity. She would burn their cities, enslave their survivors, and erase their name from history. The galaxy would learn what happened to species that defied the Valkyrie dominion. She had no idea how wrong she was on Earth. Admiral Katie Morgan received the intelligence reports about the approaching fleet. 18,000 ships. Enough firepower to crack the planet in half. Enough soldiers to occupy every continent. She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she called a meeting of every military commander on Earth. They're bringing everything, she said. Their entire war fleet, their empress, everything. We can't win a straight fight against that, Patricia Cole said. Even with the full drives, even with everything we've built, we can't match those numbers. No, Katie agreed. We can't. So we won't fight a straight fight. She pulled up a tactical display showing Earth and the approaching fleet. They expect us to defend. They expect us to hide behind our planet and wait for them. They've never faced an enemy that would do anything else. What are you suggesting? President Webb asked. Katie Morgan smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted weakness in its prey. I'm suggesting we do what humans have always done. We adapt. We surprise them. We show them that everything they think they know about war is wrong. She looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. In 3 weeks, the largest fleet in galactic history is coming to destroy us. Let's make sure they regret it. The sky turned dark on a Tuesday afternoon. 18,000 Velthari warships emerged from jump space, blocking out the sun and casting shadows across entire continents. People stopped in the streets and looked up. Children pointed at the sky. For a moment, the whole world held its breath. Empress Inthera stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and looked down at the small blue planet that had caused her so much trouble. She had conquered hundreds of worlds. She had ended civilizations older than human recorded history. This would be no different. "Begin the bombardment," she ordered. "Leave nothing alive." Her fleet moved into formation. Weapons charged. Thousands of targeting systems locked onto cities across Earth. In moments, billions of humans would die. Then the first explosion tore through her. Lead cruisers Inthera watched in confusion as more explosions followed. Ships that had been perfectly operational moments ago were suddenly torn apart from within. "What is happening?" she demanded. Her tactical officer's face went pale. "Sabotage, Empress. The supplies we received from Kethro's station. They were contaminated. Explosives hidden in the fuel cells. The humans had not just raided Kethro's station, they had poisoned it. Every ship that had refueled there was now a bomb waiting to go off. Before Zinthra could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. 3,000 human warships appeared from nowhere, folding space in ways Velthari science said was impossible. They emerged behind the fleet between the ships. Even inside the formation itself, Admiral Katie Morgan's voice echoed across every channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Morgan. Today we fight for our home. Today we fight for everyone who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is made of." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was a smile in her voice. "Let's give them something to talk about." The Battle of Earth was the largest naval engagement in galactic history. Human ships, smaller and weaker than their opponents, used their full drives to appear and disappear at will. They struck from impossible angles. They attacked, vanished, and reappeared somewhere else before the Velthari could respond. Lieutenant Danny Reyes led a squadron of fighters through the heart of the enemy fleet. His ship had been repaired a dozen times since the first battle. It was held together by patches, prayers, and pure stubbornness. "I count 30 cruisers between us and their flagship," his wingman reported. Danny grinned. "Only 30? I was hoping for a challenge." He dove into the formation, weaving between enemy ships, drawing fire that hit other Velthari vessels instead of them. Human pilots had grown up on video games that simulated exactly this kind of combat. The Velthari had trained on predictable scenarios with expected outcomes. They were not prepared for enemies who flew like they had nothing to lose, because many of them didn't. On the ground, the invasion began. Velthari dropships descended on cities around the world, carrying soldiers who expected to face terrified civilians. What they found was something else entirely. Maria Santos commanded the defense of Chicago. Her forces included professional soldiers, National Guard units, and thousands of civilian volunteers. Teachers carried rifles. Students operated drones. Elderly veterans who had fought in wars decades ago came out of retirement for one last battle. "They're landing in the park," her scout reported. "At least 200 soldiers?" Aria checked her ammunition. "Then let's welcome them to Earth." The fighting was brutal. Velthari soldiers were bigger, stronger, and better equipped. But humans knew their cities. They knew every building, every alley, every shortcut. They used that knowledge to set ambushes, create traps, and disappear before the enemy could respond. A group of teenagers used homemade drones to drop grenades on enemy positions. A retired engineer had rigged the subway system to collapse on Velthari troops. A grandmother named Patricia, 83 years old, shot 4 alien soldiers from her apartment window before they even knew where she was. "This is impossible," the Velthari ground commander reported to his superiors. "The civilians are fighting. Everyone is fighting. We cannot establish a secure position anywhere." In orbit, the battle reached its peak. Katie Morgan's fleet had destroyed over 1,000 enemy ships, but they were taking losses too. Human vessels exploded. Good people died. The Velthari still outnumbered them badly. "Need to end this quickly," Katie said. "Target the flagship. If we take out their empress, their command structure falls apart. Captain Samuel Kim's voice crackled over the radio. My squadron can get you a clear shot, Admiral. But we'll need to get close. How close? Close enough to see the whites of their eyes. Well, the purples of their eyes. Whatever. Katie hesitated. She knew what Samuel was suggesting. It was a suicide mission. Samuel, I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. We're volunteering. Samuel's voice was calm, steady. This is what we signed up for, Admiral. This is what it means to be human. We protect our own, no matter the cost. The Defiance and its squadron dove toward the Eternal Dominion. Enemy ships tried to intercept them, but Samuel's pilots were the best humanity had. They dodged, weaved, and fought their way through. One by one, ships in Samuel's squadron were destroyed. Friends died. Pilots who had trained together, laughed together, dreamed together, were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But they kept going. Dorothy, the retired schoolteacher, fired the shot that disabled the flagship's main weapons. She died moments later when a Velthari fighter crashed into her ship. Her last words were a prayer for the students she would never see again. Samuel himself guided the final torpedo. His ship was crippled, barely functional, but he nursed it forward until he was close enough that he couldn't miss. Admiral, he said quietly, tell my wife I love her. The torpedo struck the Eternal Dominion's engine room. The explosion tore through the ship, destroying systems, killing crew, and sending the most powerful vessel in the Velthari fleet spinning helplessly through space. On the bridge, Empress Zinthera felt her ship dying around her. Alarms screamed. Officers shouted. The lights flickered and died. All ships, she ordered, her voice shaking. Retreat. Retreat to the rally point. But her transmission was cut short. Another explosion rocked the ship, and Zinthera was thrown against the wall. She lay there, dazed, watching her empire crumble through the viewport. The Velthari fleet, seeing their empress's flagship disabled, fell into chaos. Ships that had fought as a unified force now fled in every direction. Human vessels pursued them, destroying stragglers, capturing those who surrendered. When the battle finally ended, 11,000 Velthari ships had been destroyed or captured. Humanity had lost over 2,000 vessels. Cities on Earth were burning. Millions were dead, but Earth remained. Battered, bleeding, scarred, but unbroken. Maria Santos stood on a rooftop in Chicago, watching the sun rise over a city that was still standing. She was exhausted, wounded, and had lost count of the friends who died during the night. But they had one in her escape pod, drifting through the debris of the battle. Empress Zinthera looked down at the planet she had come to destroy. It was still there, still spinning, still defiant. What are you? She whispered to no one. The answer came not in words, but in the sight of human rescue ships approaching her pod. They were not coming to destroy her. They were coming to save her. Even after everything, even after she had tried to kill them all. They were going to show her mercy. Zinthera did not understand. She had ruled for 300 years. She had conquered 400 species. She had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, but she had never seen anything like humanity. The surrender came 3 weeks after the battle, with her fleet destroyed and her empire in chaos. Empress Zinthera had no choice but to accept human terms. She sat in a small room aboard a human space station, waiting for the people she had tried to exterminate to decide her fate. She expected torture. She expected execution. She expected the same treatment the Velthari had given to countless conquered species over 12,000 years. It was what she deserved. It was what she would have done. Instead, President Marcus Webb walked into the room alone, without guards, without weapons. He sat down across from her and poured 2 glasses of water. Drink, he said. You look like you need it. Zinthera stared at him. This small, fragile creature who had somehow defeated the greatest military force in galactic history. Why haven't you killed me? Would killing you bring back the people we lost? Would it rebuild our cities? Would it undo anything that happened? No, but it would be justice. Webb sighed. He looked tired, older than he had been at the start of the war. He had sent millions of young people to fight and die. He had made decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Justice, he repeated. Your people killed billions of humans. You destroyed cities that took centuries to build. You tried to wipe out our entire species. He paused. And yet here I am offering you water instead of a bullet. Do you know why? Zinthora shook her head. Because we're not you. We never wanted this war. We never wanted to kill anyone. We just wanted to be left alone, to live our lives, to raise our children, to look at the stars and wonder what's out there. Webb leaned forward. You forced us to become warriors. You forced us to learn how to kill. But that's not who we are. That's not who we want to be. He slid a document across the table. This is our proposal. A galactic federation. Equal representation for all species, including the Veltheri. No more conquests. No more slavery. No more genocide. Every civilization with a voice. Zinthora read the document slowly. It was revolutionary. It went against everything the Velthri had believed for 12,000 years. You would give us a voice? After everything we've done? We've done terrible things too. Every species has. Humans spent most of their history killing each other. We've had wars, genocides, atrocities that make your conquest look tame. Webb's voice was quiet, honest. But the question isn't what we were. The question is what we choose to become. The signing ceremony took place 1 month later. Representatives from dozens of species gathered on a space station built specifically for the occasion. Species that had been enslaved by the Veltheri for centuries stood as equals with their former masters. Enemies who had fought each other for generations shook hands and began the slow process of building peace. Admiral Katie Morgan attended the ceremony in her dress uniform. She had retired from active duty the week before. Her war was over. Now she wanted to spend her remaining years doing something other than killing. Strange, isn't it? Danny Reyes said, standing beside her. He had been promoted to captain after the battle. His face still bore scars from a fighter crash that had nearly killed him. A year ago, we didn't even know these aliens existed. Now we're building a government with them. Katie watched as President Webb and Empress Zinthora signed the founding document of the Galactic Federation. That's humans for you. We adapt. We change. We find ways to move forward, even when it seems impossible. Do you think it will last? Katie thought about the question. She thought about all the peace treaties in human history that had failed, all the alliances that had crumbled, all the promises that had been broken. I don't know, she admitted. But I know we have to try, because the alternative is going back to what we were. And I think we're better than that. Maria Santos became the first human ambassador to the Veltheri homeworld. It was a strange assignment for someone who had spent the war killing Veltheri soldiers, but perhaps that was the point. If she could find a way to forgive, anyone could. She walked through streets that had once been planned as staging grounds for humanity's extinction. She met aliens who looked at her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She answered their questions about Earth, about humans, about why her species had refused to surrender. You should hate us, a young Veltheri told her one day. We tried to kill everyone you love. Maria thought about her brother, buried in a cemetery outside Chicago. She thought about the friends she had lost. The soldiers who had died in her arms, the civilians who had been killed by orbital bombardments. She had every reason to hate. I probably should, she admitted, but hate takes energy, and we've got a galaxy to build. The young Veltheri didn't seem to understand. His species had never learned to let go of anger. They had held grudges for millennia, passing down hatred from generation to generation. How do you do it? He asked. How do you forgive? Maria considered the question carefully. We don't forgive because you deserve it. We forgive because we deserve it. Carrying hatred around is exhausting. It eats you up inside. At some point, you have to choose. Do you want to spend your life being angry, or do you want to spend it building something better? She looked out at the alien city around her. A year ago, she would have been happy to see it burn. Now, she found herself curious about its history, its culture, its people. We're not saints. We're not perfect. We're just people trying to do better than we did yesterday. That's all anyone can do. Across the galaxy, the story of humanity spread. Species that had lived in fear of the Velthri for thousands of years heard about the small planet that had refused to kneel. They heard about the soldiers who had sacrificed themselves, the civilians who had taken up arms, the leaders who had chosen mercy over revenge, and they began to hope. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. Cities were rebuilt. Families mourned their dead and celebrated their survivors. Children grew up hearing stories about the war, about the heroes who had fought and died, about the moment when humanity had looked at extinction and laughed. Katie Morgan settled into a small house by the ocean. She spent her days fishing, reading, and watching the stars that had once been the source of so much fear. Sometimes late at night, she would think about the people she had lost, the soldiers who had served under her, the friends who had died in the void, but mostly she thought about the future, a galaxy full of species learning to live together, a universe where no one had to be afraid, a dream that seemed impossible a year ago, now slowly becoming reality. Was it worth it? Danny asked her during one of his visits. Katie watched the sun set over the ocean. The same sun that had risen over a battlefield, over burning cities, over graves dug for young people who should have lived forever. "Ask me in 100 years," she said. "When humans and Velthri are trading, sharing knowledge, building things together. When the children being born today have never known a universe where species hate each other. When everything we fought for is just the way things are," she smiled. "Then I'll tell you if it was worth it." The galaxy watched humanity spread among the stars. They watched this strange species that refused to give up, refused to hate, refused to accept that things couldn't get better. They watched, and slowly they began to understand. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the smartest, not the oldest, not the most advanced. But they were something else entirely. They were the species that had looked at the void and grinned. They were the species that had turned war into hope. They were the species that had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly alive. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the universe felt a little bit brighter.